So welcome to all the people who are joining us on the web. This is the launch event for Design Foundations Round 3. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today and to give you this opening briefing on the competition. My name's Edward Hobson. I'm Head of Design for KTN, which is the Knowledge Transfer Network. Knowledge Transfer Network, if you don't know us, we are the UK's innovation network. We work very closely with Innovate UK, and we are here to help your business grow and accelerate through innovation. So what can you expect today? So this is effectively the start of a journey. It might be a familiar journey, or it might be one that you're just embarking on as a company. And we hope this journey will really support your business's growth and development. The nature of the competition is about investing in ideas, investing in early opportunities, and we will hear from a range of contributors this morning how that is possible and how that can work for your business. There will be a briefing in terms of what the competition is and how you can apply for it and what it's really intending to do. So from this morning, you should really walk away with a good insight, knowing exactly whether this is for you, whether this is an opportunity that really resonates with what you are trying to achieve, who can actually put an application in for this competition, and really understand this is a competition, but what other benefits can it unlock for us? The things that you perhaps don't recognize, the things that are the ulterior benefits. And there's a whole host of important things about how to do it, what the deadlines are, the criteria, all the nitty-gritty. So we'll be going through that as well. Our role in terms of KTN is to help you through this process. Innovate UK fund the competition. KTN is here to help you as companies apply to this. So there are a number of my colleagues here in the room. So Jake Larsson is from the design team. Delina Evans sat in the back. And I think Gabriella from our health team is also here today. We will explain a little bit more about the breadth and the reach of the KTN later in the morning, once we've gone through the competition. So what's going to happen this morning? Well, once we've kind of gone through our introductions, I'll be handing over to Ben Griffin, who's the innovation lead for design at Innovate UK. And Ben will be walking us through the competition, through Design Foundations, what the aspiration of the competition is, what it hopes to achieve, and how it can help your business, what it's really there to help you do. There's plenty of time this morning for Q&A. These sort of events always generate lots of questions, so please, there are no stupid questions. Put your hands up and we'll take as many as possible. That also applies to people listening to this online. We'll moderate the questions to try and take them in groups, so we'll be able to absorb a lot of that as well. We'll then break for coffee, and we'll hear, after returning, about the application process itself. So this is how do you think this is great, you think it's an opportunity for your business, how do I actually go about putting an application together? What is involved? What do I need to do? And so Joe Lyford from Innovate UK's competition team will be walking us through that process. Again, that will generate a lot of Q&A, and we'll be here to answer that. Lunch will then follow, and there'll be various opportunities in terms of networking and providing the opportunity to meet one another, but also use the available networking facilities that we have. So I'll just hand over to Jake to actually walk us through what those opportunities are. So thanks very much, Jake.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Welcome, everyone. So today is about the competition, but it's also about making connections as well and making those essential collaborations that are necessary for these innovations that we want to see in Design Foundations. So today in the room, we should have around about half businesses looking for design and half designers offering it. And you can identify yourselves by the colours on your badges. I believe pink is design and blue is perhaps people that are looking for it. So please do use those sessions, the coffee session and the lunch session, to network, chat, collide, bump into one another. Those are where the interesting things happen. But we also have a networking wall. This is how it was last night when I put it on this slide. But the more information that we put on there, I would have sent a link round last night or a few days ago in an email. where you can enter your information on there, and the more information you put in, then the more information people can find you, find your expertise, or offer support to the things that you are lacking. So please do fill that in, because the more information in there, then the better. Delina will be looking after that during the break sessions, so if anything is confusing, then please do speak to her about that. Also, people that are watching this on the webcast, they are able to use this system as well. So unfortunately, maybe you could not be here today to network with people, but hopefully this networking system will allow people to find one another if you were not able to come here today. So it's entirely up to you whether you'd like to enter your information in there, of course, but I would encourage you to put in as much as possible. So we also have a few other people here today, not just businesses looking for design and designers. We also, I don't think Service Design Network could be here, but Service Design Network, a big thank you to them for spreading the message out about this. They aim to serve the service design community in the UK by being open, collaborative, and amplifying what's going on in the service design community. Similarly, the British Industrial Design Association, BIDA, they have done a lot pushing the message out there about this competition, but unfortunately I don't think they can be here either today. It's a not-for-profit organisation run on behalf of its members by a voluntary elected board of designers, so please do check them out as well. Design Network North, I think they are here today somewhere. They increase the contribution that design makes to the economy, and they can introduce you to someone who can help develop a new product or to improve something that you already do. So, and again, thank you for pushing out the message to them as well. And lastly, we've got Design Council here as well. They aim to inspire new design thinking, encourage public debate, and inform government policy to improve everyday life and help meet tomorrow's challenges today. We're going to hear a little bit from Ellie later about the design process if you're new to design. And hopefully she can give you some nice case studies about what we're looking for here today as well. So there's a couple of things I've put up here on this slide. If you want to know about scope or eligibility, then please do speak to Innovate UK. Some contact details will be shown later. If you want to gain feedback on your application, that's what we can do at the Knowledge Transfer Network. If you want to know more about the design process, then please do speak to the Design Council. If you'd like to know more about the impact of design, I think we're going to have some people from RSA pop by later. Please do see them. And if you'd like to get in touch with designers, then we have our networking wall, but we also have the Service Design Network, BIDA, and Design Network North. Okay, so I've already covered a lot of information, and if that whizzes past you, then do approach me, Ed, Delina, or Gabriella anytime today, and we can walk you through things. So I'm going to hand back to Ed now, and we'll kick this thing off.
Okay, thank you very much, Jake. And I should also mention that whilst this is being streamed online, it's also being recorded. So any details that you don't grab today, you can revisit the website and look at this whole morning's event and familiarise yourself with that again. Just in terms of housekeeping, I don't think there are any fire alarms planned. So if you do hear an alarm, then it's straight down the stairs, out the main doors again, and across the street. Phones, if you could just ensure that it's turned to silent, please, that'd be very helpful. And I think all I need to do is hand over to Ben, who will be talking through the competition scope and details. So, Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks, Jake. And hello, everyone. Thanks for coming along. It's great to see a full room today, and I think we've got quite a lot of people online as well, so that's great. I'm going to focus for a bit on really what we're aiming to fund with this competition, the kinds of project, the kinds of activity that we're looking for. My colleague Joe later on will talk through some of the important details around eligibility and funding rules and regulations and so on. But this is just to give you a flavour of whether the project that you have in mind is actually suitable for this funding opportunity. So the bare bones of it, we're talking today about a grant funding competition for early stage human-centred design projects, and we're going to talk a bit about what we mean by that in a moment. We're offering grants of up to 70% towards the total cost of your project. the value of the grant that you can win depends on the size of your company. The projects that we're looking to support will have a total cost of between £10,000 and £40,000 and must last no longer than 3 months. So these are really fast-moving, quick projects. In terms of Innovate UK, we deliver an awful lot of research and development, R&D funding to help businesses develop their new ideas, often relating to new technologies, and moving them towards commercialization. Now that's great, so we can help you move from your idea towards commercial revenue. But of course there's a bit missing from that picture, which is how did you get to that idea in the first place? And how do you know that an idea is actually worth progressing before you make a significant investment in developing the technology to deliver it towards the market? Well, we think the answer involves engaging with people earlier on in that process and using people as a source of inspiration and also as a way to validate your thinking, and to do that iteratively and to do it quickly and routinely, so that by the time you come to invest in an idea and move it towards commercialization, you have confidence that is actually solving an important problem for people. It's something that people care about, there's a market there, it will be desirable, it will be easy to use, and so on. And design, of course, is a great way to engage with people, and gives you a process that you can use to go through that inspiration and validation process. In terms of Innovate UK's investment, the thinking behind this is that actually a relatively small investment in early stage design will help to de-risk subsequent investments, both ours and your own, subsequent R&D investments, and ultimately, therefore, will return greater value to the UK economy. So, what could you do with a Design Foundations grant? Fundamentally, 2 things. The funding is intended to help you explore innovation opportunities inspired by people's needs and behaviours. Now, you could use a grant to generate new ideas, to conduct some human-centred research and to use that as a source of inspiration for new innovation opportunities. Or you can use this funding to very quickly test your existing ideas with people and iterate and refine them to give you that confidence that you're going in the right direction. The outputs of these projects could also be very helpful to you in how you communicate your ideas and move forward with your innovation process. So the human-centred design and research that you carry out can give you evidence of market demand, which then can inform your innovation strategy. So where are you actually going to spend your time and money going forward? Can help to support a business case for internal investment or for an investor proposition. Equally, it can help you put you in a better position to secure further R&D funding through Innovate UK or through another grant funding mechanism. Often, for example, if you're applying for one of Innovate UK's R&D funding competitions, you'll be asked on your application form to explain your idea, to explain the market need and the potential of your idea. If you've been through an early stage human-centred design process, we think that you'll be in a much better position to answer that question well, rather than just it being based on your own assumptions or previous experience. So to win funding through this competition, the project needs to be early stage. That means identifying and exploring innovation opportunities, generating new ideas, or testing previously undeveloped ideas. If the project that you have in mind is really design development of an idea that you're already quite fixed on, you just want to look at the design for manufacture, the final design specification, that's beyond the scope of this competition. And in fact, that is something which would be eligible for funding through our other mechanisms. So the focus really is on the early stage activity with this competition. And we'd like the work that you do to be fundamentally human-centred, so we'd like to see direct engagement with people. Now, obviously, you think of customers and users, but equally, at the start of a project, it's worth spending a bit of time mapping out the stakeholder environment, because yes, there are customers and users, but there are also internal stakeholders whose needs you'll need to think about. There are perhaps suppliers, engineers, logistics people, delivery people, all sorts of people who will help you deliver a product or service to market, and whose needs and particular requirements you might need to consider. The projects can be in any industry or technology sector, so we're agnostic in that sense, whether you're doing something for healthcare, whether you're doing something for advanced manufacturing, it's all within scope. And you can use this design process to explore opportunities for physical or digital products, experiences, services, or business models. In fact, I think some of the most interesting projects that we funded through this mechanism last year were a combination of those different disciplines working together. In terms of the structure of your project, we'd like you to follow a proven design process. And in the scope document, which you can find on the Innovate UK website now, we reference some of the better known examples, the double diamond process, which I think Ellie from the Design Council is going to talk about later this morning, design kit for human-centered design, which is an IDEO process, and the Stanford Design School processes as well. Now, these are just generic examples. As you'll know, if you've ever typed design process into Google, there are any number of bespoke processes, usually with nicely designed icons and terminology that claim to explain how you can go through this human-centered process. When you interrogate them, you tend to find that actually the theories behind them, the thinking is quite similar. So we're not saying that you must use a particular one of these processes, but if it's something that's new to you, do look at the processes that are out there, understand them, see how they could be beneficial to you, and use that as a structure for your project. Within that project, you might, for example, include activities or work packages to identify and engage with relevant stakeholders, to understand their motivations and behaviours, and what that means to you in terms of opportunities to do things better, to address pain points, or to recognise new value opportunities. To use all that insight as a source of inspiration to generate new ideas, and to refer to that group of people as a way to quickly test and iterate ideas with people using fast prototyping and mock-ups. And finally, to document that understanding and to communicate your learning and your propositions in a way that will help you with your next steps, so put you in a better position for further R&D activity. As I say, it might be specifically about supporting a business case, an investor proposition, or an application for further funding. Now, there's quite a lot in there, and right at the start I mentioned that we're talking about 3-month projects. So the first thing to say is we don't necessarily expect you to do all of this. It's going to be about understanding where the value is for you, for your organisation, and planning a project that actually is going to deliver some value to you and which is actually feasible to do within the time frame available. But all of those activities we would consider to be human-centred, early stage, and within scope. So a little bit more detail perhaps on what we think a great design foundations project might look like. I don't know if anyone's been keeping count of how many times I've said human-centred this morning, but it really is important. Frankly, if you're developing a technology and you're trying to meet a list of technical requirements and you're proving the feasibility of a technology, there's plenty of other funding opportunities available to you to do that. This is really an opportunity for you to do something slightly different, and we think it's really important for you in the long term to lay the foundations, as the name would suggest, to lay the foundations for successful innovation. So understand who the people are that you need to be talking to. And yes, surveys are useful, market research studies are useful, you can do a certain amount from your desk, but please take this opportunity, there's money on the table, take this opportunity to go out there and spend time with real people. Understand who your customers are, even if you think you've been delivering products and services to a particular market for X number of years, you think you know that market inside out. I guarantee you'll be surprised if you go and hang out with people for a day. People do stuff that you wouldn't believe. They use your products and services in ways that you could never imagine. There are things that annoy them that they work around without even thinking about on a daily basis. And all of those little insights provide opportunities for you to improve and do things better and potentially get a commercial advantage. So put people at the heart of the project. Also take the opportunity to rethink the problem space. It's perfectly valid, for example, to start a design project with the brief that, we want to design a better washing machine. And that's great. You can go out and you can watch how people use their washing machines, why they choose one over another, and you can come up with a long list of ways that you can design a better washing machine. That's fine, that's valid. But don't miss this opportunity to actually understand why people want a washing machine in the first place. Because there might be other innovation opportunities there that could present a valuable opportunity to you. For example, perhaps what if we rented our clothes rather than bought them? How could you freshen up or clean your clothes without using a washing machine? Are there fibres that we could use that wash themselves? It opens the door. And they might not, or these opportunities might not be right for your business, but it's worth spending a bit of time exploring them and seeing where the opportunity is. When you look at these design processes, they all look very simple and logical. They step you through step by step, and it all seems fine and quite easy to understand. The reality is that often it feels a bit more like this. When you start out on this journey, particularly if you're doing that, observing people, rethinking the problem, you don't really know where you're going to end up. And actually, that's fine. The design process is designed to start from this point of uncertainty and steer you through that towards a clarity, a clear way forward. So be comfortable with that, and also be prepared to challenge yourselves. Sometimes this process uncovers truths that actually be easier if you didn't know. It's easier just to do what we did last year and to keep turning the wheel. Sometimes you're going to make discoveries that really encourage you to rethink and do things differently. You might start the project with a particular idea and actually discover that, do you know what? It's not the right idea after all. We'd be much better off doing this. That's fine. If the scope of your project changes in response to valid customer insight, human learning, that's fine. That's what it's all about. Now, design, as we know, is much more about drawing pretty pictures, but actually the visual and physical aspects of design are something very important and add something valuable to that process, because it's a great way to overcome communication barriers and explain your ideas in a way that encourages people to get involved, to collaborate, to challenge your thinking and to come up with new ideas, and to explain your ideas and the justification for them to important stakeholders, investors, and so on. So lots of sketching, lots of quick mock-ups, sticking bits of cardboard together, hacking bits out of insulation foam, whatever it takes to get an idea across and get people involved. That's what we'd like to see. And on that vein, fast testing, learning and iteration is a common characteristic of these projects. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend the TEDx video from Tom Chi, who talks about the prototyping process that they went through with the Google Glass product and how quickly they actually managed to simulate that experience and get to a point of whether it was actually worth progressing or not and which direction they should be going in. They didn't invest hundreds of thousands of dollars developing the technology and making a working prototype. They just connected a notebook computer to a little miniature projector and a piece of coat hanger wire over the ear and a piece of acetate film, and they were able to mock up what it would feel like to have a digital interface floating in your field of view. And that gave them sufficient learning to be able to progress. And okay, what if we could control that with gestures and so on? So technology is important, but at this stage, always be thinking, how can we get the learning that we need? How can we make discoveries? How can we decide whether this is right or wrong without making the technology work? Think smoke and mirrors. Just simulate the experience as quickly and as cheaply as you can to get that learning. So a little bit of detail, a little bit more detail on the funding. As I say, in terms of eligibility, we'll cover that later this morning. Total project cost is between £10,000 and £40,000, and the grant that you can win will be a percentage of that. So you need to make a contribution to the project as well. Many of you in the room will probably be in the SME category. So if you're a small organisation up to 50 people, we're talking about a 70% grant. If you're a medium organisation up to 250 people, 60% grant, and above that, a 50% grant. The contribution that you as the applicant make to the project needs to be in real auditable costs incurred within the project. So you can't kind of just pretend, you can't work for free effectively and say, well, it would have cost this much money if I'd been working on the project, so that's my contribution. You need to actually make that payment through either your PAYE system or at least recorded on the recorded in the books so that it's auditable. In the case of this competition, we're saying that up to 70% of the total project value, not 70% of the grant, but 70% of the total project value can be used for subcontracting. For many of you, if you're a small business, this might be the first time you've carried out this kind of project, might be the first time you've worked with designers or used design. Therefore, it's quite likely that you're going to want to connect with a design service provider and use them as subcontractors on the project. So 70% of your costs, if it's the right thing for you, can be used towards that subcontracting. Research organisations, which include universities and so on, can work on projects as collaborators. They can't lead projects, more details on that later. But any research organisations involved with the project cannot claim more than 50% of the total project costs in total. So that's just a bit of information, more details and questions on that later. And I guess dates are also important, so this is all fairly quick. The competition is open as of yesterday, so if you go to Innovate UK and look at the open competitions, there's an option on our website where you can search all currently open funding competitions. You'll find design foundations in that list. I should point out that I think on some of the literature today we've talked about Design Foundations Round 3, and you'll see that the competition is actually called 2018 Round 1. Depends whether you want to start renumbering in 2018 or not. I didn't, but someone did. So it's the only one that you'll find in that list anyway, so don't worry too much about that. The deadline for your applications is 19th of September, so you don't have too long to actually start thinking about your project, connecting with people and getting that application in. And then we expect to be notifying people whether or not you've been successful in winning a grant on the 26th of October. It's hard to say exactly when projects can start because if you win a grant, there's a certain amount of toing and froing with paperwork. You just need to tick some boxes for us. And if we can do that really quickly, then actually you can usually get up and running with your project quite quickly. If there are any delays, it can take a bit longer. But roughly think about starting your project around about mid-November. And as I say, the projects need to finish by 31st of March. It's unfortunate, obviously, we have the festive period in there as well, so you need to kind of factor that in. Don't plan a one-month project over Christmas and then be surprised when you don't manage to get it done in time. Okay, so that's everything from me on, hopefully gives you an idea of the sorts of projects that we're looking to fund. And I think there's a bit of an opportunity to answer some questions. Or? Okay. I will allow Ed to introduce Ed knows the agenda much better than I do.
Okay, so thanks very much, Ben. So that's great that we've got an outline of what the competition is for, the aspiration of how you can really make the most of that. And Ben's sort of referenced a number of design processes in that, and there's no sort of perfect way to do this, but there are some familiar and some common characteristics in terms of the approach, which would really stand an application in good stead if you followed the number of these approaches. So I'd like to invite Ellie from Design Council to just run through the Design Council's approach, which is the double diamond. Now, this is one of many approaches, but by going through one of these approaches, it just illuminates and for those who are not familiar with the kind of the approach or the thinking behind it, puts a little more detail and tangibility on the process. So, Ellie, can I hand over to you?
Thank you. Yeah. So just to explain, we're a charity, we're a government advisor on design. We demonstrate the value of design in markets and sectors where design isn't ordinarily obvious or used. So we do that through practice, and then we use practice to inform policy. So we're not a consultancy, but we're here to provide information and advice. So on the back of today, hopefully you'll talk to my colleagues here, but there's a website. We've got lots of resources to help you think about your project, how you can structure it, but above all, how your project will achieve this. We think that all good design should be improving people's lives. Otherwise, it's just another thing in the world, and that would be a shame. We think there are a lot of people here today, probably with a brilliant idea that could be even better if we're really understanding what people's needs are, and we could really transform people's lives. So, over the years, and since we developed our own approach to doing that through a methodology we call the Double Diamond, there are 3 simple things that we picked up from an agency called IDEO. It's a really established global innovation agency. And they introduced us to this about 20 years ago, which is, if you can make something better if it starts and ends with what people need. If you're always concerned with that throughout your process, throughout the next few months and years you're developing your business, you can't go far wrong. It's so common for startups, and we've done a lot of work with startups over the last 15 years. We've worked with 5,000 SMEs, that it's so tempting to focus on the technical aspects. How are we going to make this at scale and create value in the market, make money out of it? So technically and financially, what's possible, and forgetting all the time what works for people and how do people's needs change over time. So we developed something called the Double Diamond. We call it a framework for innovation. It's out there in the public domain under Creative Commons. I think the design agencies that you come into contact with through this amazing opportunity through design foundations will have heard of the Double Diamond. It's a globally referenced design process. We developed it because we found that many projects begin with an assumption about what the idea is going to be and how we're going to develop it. And usually that can work, but often we have found in most cases it's overlooking many other opportunities in the market where you as a business could make even more value and create even better products and services for people and meeting their needs. So the vital steps that we found were missing were discovering, again, even if you think you're an expert in the problem or the market that you're working in, there'll probably be people around you who have a different take on the needs in that market. And as Ben said, it's really important that through this stage, which is rediscovering what you think the problems are out there that people have and how your idea could best meet their needs. And don't just think about that from your own internal perspective. It's vital you're collaborating with others as part of that process. So it could be there are other technical experts, there are probably potential customers, or don't just think about customers, who's going to distribute it, who's going to commission it, the people who might use it at the end of the line as such. You might need to think about all the range of people that will come into contact with your idea, and everyone will have a different need. So it's vital that you're understanding that in this first diamond we call rediscovering and redefining what you think your idea is really about. Then you're probably well placed to make a real case to develop something that is more likely to succeed in the market. I wanted to bring this to life through a quick example of a business that we worked with more than a decade ago, but also Innovate UK supported. So I think it's a great example of how our organisations as partners have helped a business to get going. So this startup had an idea. Basically, it's invisible, their product, you can't see it, but it's a very clever way of sniffing the quality of the air and identifying, is there anything harmful in the air that could affect someone's life? So they had an idea of a market that this could go into. They were a team of 3 people, very smart, combination of business and technical experts. Their problem is they couldn't explain the idea very clearly. They had a myriad of ways of talking about it from a technical point of view, but not in a way that was really compelling, that would really mean something to a range of different people who might actually have a vested interest, not least investors. They needed to attract investors, obviously, in order to take their idea forward. So the other angle to that was, although they were very clear about where they wanted to take their idea first, they were unclear about all the different other uses or benefits of this technology that they developed. So they started at the beginning. We took them back a step because they were very clear in the middle what the problem was in that initial market, but we took them back a step to say, well, if this is like a sensitive nose, an invisible nose that can smell a range of different chemical and gas agents in the atmosphere, and it can do it really accurately, and it can do it even if those agents are in very small quantities. how many other industries could this be applied to? And it was a really exploratory process that they went through in this very first stage, working with a range of different experts, not just the people in their team. So they brought together designers, researchers, people from food industry, gas, oil, healthcare, as well as military, because one of the first areas they wanted to look at was how can we actually get this into areas where personnel, if they're sent into a part of the world that isn't safe, how can we make sure we avoid endangering people's lives, citizens' lives. So we had a way of helping them think about structured workshops over a period of time with this multidisciplinary, multiple market perspectives coming together to really start to uncover what some of the problems were in those different market spaces. And that actually introduced ideas at very, very early stages of development that they hadn't thought about. And a quick example of that is we got them to think about, well, you're very clear about the kind of person that might use your product or might take up this idea. They're very obvious, as Ben said. Don't think about the obvious people that this idea could be applied or used by. Actually think about the people who are more likely to not use it, to reject your idea, the people that really need it but may not come into contact with it. So we got the business to focus more on the left as much as they were focusing on the right. If you're more likely to do those two extremes and understand from a range of perspectives what's going on in a day in the life of those different kinds of people in those different markets, then we're more likely to come up with an idea that could work for a much broader range of people and therefore markets. So out of that step, they were able to define some early market applications of their product. And in this definition stage, it really helped them to start to distill from these different applications, what could we generate revenue from first, and what might be a longer term project that might take longer to get to market. So again, they were able to think about prototyping the idea as quickly as they could to test, are we going to raise money or generate revenue quickly from this idea? And from areas like healthcare, which takes sometimes years to get into that sort of market, how can we start testing that now so we know in about 8 to 10 years' time we could be leaders in that particular space? So they were able to map from a revenue, and remember a business point of view, how quickly can they develop the technology, when can they generate revenue, but always rooted in what people are going to need in those different markets. That gave them a really clear development plan. And again, as Ben said, we're looking, Innovate UK are looking for very early stage projects here. So the end point here may not be a finished product, but it's a really, really clear roadmap. And it's helping you to think about how, don't be afraid to diverge and converge through this process. It's really important that you're getting as much insight as possible now at the early stages so you can build some structure upon that and start to map out when you think you could start to take these ideas to market, when they start to generate revenue for your business. And this is exactly what this particular startup did. Through this process, they were able to come up with hundreds of ideas across several sectors right at that beginning stage. But they were able to narrow their focus down on a few key markets. So they were really saying, we can't take this product or this idea to all these different sectors. We're going to have to choose which are the 5 or 8 that we think are going to be really integral to our own business. From the development stage, they then focused on those sectors and really concentrated at this point to think about how can we rapidly prototype and learn by literally hanging out with people in those businesses that we want to sell into, really understand what's going on in their world so that we can start to apply, prototype this idea with them, so we're more likely to get insights from them and with them that we can add great value whilst this idea is at early stage. And this is a picture of the MD, and it was one of their early prototypes, a rough and ready prototype. I remember I said that one of the first applications was how can we drop hundreds of these invisible noses through the atmosphere so they can take a really good, accurate reading of the quality of the air and feed that data back from a safe distance. So this was a demonstration that they could run with a potential customer to demonstrate the technology worked, not just in the lab, but in the real world as well. And at that stage, what was really important was they were able to start to talk to their investors about the fact that they don't just have a good potential revenue plan, a plan over the 10-year period of how their business might grow. They've got a good technology development plan around that, but it's rooted in understanding the market that they're going into. They added a line to this, which is at every point of the development of their idea, they were demonstrating and sharing the evidence that they had captured by working with people who were going to use the idea, whether it was, again, as I say, commissioning it, funding it, maintaining it, or actually benefiting from it in the market. So the 4 stages here, if there are 4 things to convey, it's don't be afraid to step back, try not to leap into the development of your idea, rediscover what the problems are out there in the world that your idea could be a solution to, find new ways to define that idea through adding value to people's lives. It will add value to your idea and therefore your business. And make sure that when you are starting to develop your idea, you're basing it on evidence and you're only focusing on those ideas. You've filtered other potentially earlier ideas out of the process, so you're more likely to deliver something that will have impact in the market. As I said, through this methodology, where this startup got to was they felt more confident and clear about who they were and where they were trying to get to. They were clear about where they were pitching their idea. Their investors immediately raised more money to put into the business because they really sensed that this particular company were going to go into other markets over time, and they felt really excited about that. There was obviously more return on investment potential for them. And the outcome speaks for itself. Within a year, they raised over $2.3 million to help them to test their product more formally in those different markets. They were able to adapt their idea. So as they tested, they said if this product works 80% well for all these different markets, we'll understand what the differences are so we can build that insight now into the development of our product. And then when we're ready to launch, we don't have to go back to the drawing board and start to understand the market from scratch. And I mentioned that one of the 8 areas that they focused on was in healthcare. And today, Alstone have set up a separate business, and they are actually a pioneer in this sensitive nose that can not only detect the health of the air around us, but actually the health of our breath, and to the extent that it can detect early stages of diseases such as diabetes and different forms of cancer. But they identified those opportunities 10 years ago. So it's been a long horizon, but I think this is the point. This is an early stage design process, and we're helping businesses all the time to think through where they're going to be, thinking long term. And the proof speaks for itself. There's evidence to support that, good design early on, thinking about design makes good business sense. So for every £1 you might spend from your Design Foundations grant, think about the return on investment it could give you. We found that businesses and startups in particular that have used design in the very early stages have actually generated these returns. We followed up over 100 startups this year who'd been through support programs that we ran a few years ago, and 91% of them are still trading compared to 49% of startups in the UK. It's a really difficult time. It's difficult to get funding. This is a unique opportunity for you to get funding to test your idea using design, which I think is a really fantastic way of demonstrating how you can de-risk your ideas now at the early stage and make sure you only take forward the strongest ones. I think, again, just thinking through 4 things. As you're working through your application, challenge yourself. Are we being people-centred in this application? Are we really thinking about how we're going to use this grant to test what people need? How are we going to communicate this idea visually? You'll have noticed that the business we work with always communicated visually, even with their investors. Words and numbers are important, but sometimes when you're conveying something quite complicated, working visually, communicating visually is a powerful tool. Make sure you're not designing in a vacuum. Bring in all those other stakeholders around you that can help to really challenge your thinking and get fresh insight. And even when you're at the point where you think you've got the answer to the right question, just remember, someone once said, live in beta, that mindset of always be comfortable with testing and iterating your idea. Even when you finally launch something, you'll always be refining it and improving it. So I think, in summary, these are the things that this programme probably will give you. Unlock new value, therefore new IP, reducing your risk, accelerating your path to market like it did for the startup. They got to market a year faster than they thought they would through using a good design process. And just finding new ways to take your idea to different markets. You think you might have that cracked, but probably the answer will come from all the expertise around you. So as I said, there's more information on our website. We've got lots of case studies of projects that have used design to help them do these things. And we're also downstairs later if you have any further questions. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ellie. And I think that was really useful to get that overview of the entirety of a process. That was taking a company over a number of years to actually develop all that. The competition, as Ben has outlined, is for projects that are lasting 3 months. So we're not expecting that large horizon and that large time scale gets crammed into a short 3-month project, but it gives you a flavour of some of the possibilities and some of the potential by taking some of the elements from the approach and applying them to the right business at the right time. We've got about 20 minutes for questions, principally for Ben. So Ben, do you want to come back into the frame? So I'm sure that we will do this in 2 halves. So we have a further presentation from Joe about the actual competition application process. So that is sort of the nuts and bolts of what do I need to do for this particular question, what's the sort of specifics that I need to go through. Ben will take questions more on sort of the broad sort of eligibility and scope and actual content in terms of whether ideas feel like they're kind of the right thing that you should be in the frame for funding. For our audience online, please write questions and Delina will take those and I'll keep going back to Delina and she can feed them into the room. A few ground rules on terms of questions. There are a couple of roving mics. Please use the mics because then we can actually capture your question on the recording. It'd be useful if you could just introduce yourself, say who you are, where you're from, and also please ask a question rather than just an observation. It gives Ben a chance of answering it. Can I take questions from the room first? Yes, at the back.
Hi, Natalie Goff, London South Bank University. With the previous rounds, would you say what sort of volume did you receive and what's the likelihood of success in application process?
Good question. So thinking back, we ran 2 rounds of this competition last year, some of you will be aware. In each of those rounds, we had roughly about 200 applications. And I think we funded about 45 projects from each round. We funded about 90 projects in total. So you've got about a sort of 1 in 4, 1 in 3 chance of success, if you like.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for the presentation. That was really interesting. Quick question. If your company is constituted here in the UK, but your customers are overseas in Africa in our case, are we still eligible?
Yes. That was an easy one. Your travel and subsistence costs in your project, I think, might be a bit higher. But
Hi, Naomi Dines, Central St Martin's University of the Arts, London. Is there a limit on the number of very small collaborating organisations that could apply together? Does it have to be a single company, for example?
No limit. If you wanted a collaboration with a dozen companies in it, you can do that. If you think it makes sense. My inkling is these are, as I say, quite small projects, so you probably don't want anything that's too complicated. In my experience, the more collaborators you have, the more chance of project delay, which if we only have a 3-month window is a risk, but there's nothing to stop you bringing as many people on board as possible. And not every collaborator needs to be actually receiving some of the grant. You can have kind of non-paid collaborators as well.
Great, thanks.
I'm new to design, Gary McCard from Timeshift. I just wanted to ask, most SMEs, startups, get fairly greedy when it comes to wanting to get as much expertise crammed into a small time and but fewer people as possible in terms of cost anyway. Are there organisations out there, maybe in the room today, who actually would combine conceptually design, development, as well as some form of research, structuring, construction, research process construction, such as, for example, a basics observational trial in a non-clinical environment, for example.
I would have thought so. So today,
I mean, it's a very generic question. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So, yes, I think obviously today is a networking opportunity as well. So hopefully you can talk to people and find people this afternoon. But certainly, the design landscape in particular is quite a broad church, and you will get people within that who specialise in a certain discipline or a certain part of the design process. But equally, certainly there are organisations that can help you to structure the project, help you to conduct that early stage customer engagement and research, and take that forward to idea generation.
Under one roof, maybe.
Yes, yeah, and in fact, I think there are swings and roundabouts, but personally, I think if you can involve the same people who've gone out and spoken to customers with coming up with the ideas, then it helps to kind of maintain that customer insight throughout the process.
Just always want to have cake and eat it, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I think if we take a few questions from online as well, so there are a number of questions coming in, so Delina, if you're able to, so I've just located that at the most inappropriate place for you to get a microphone.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we've got one from Causeway Education. Would conducting human-centered research to shift an existing product towards providing a new, different service fall into the right area for the grant?
Yes. Yep. On that small amount of information, that sounds like that would be... And a general point to make, and I think Jake mentioned earlier, is that there are different organisations sort of in the room here today who can help you with different things. If you have a scope enquiry, you can contact Innovate UK customer support, and in fact those will tend to end up in my inbox, so you'll probably end up getting a response from me. Equally, the KTN can provide independent advice and help with your application. So I can look at an application, tell you whether I think it's in scope or not, but I can't really give you advice. But the KTN, because they're kind of a separate organisation, they can look through a draft application, for example, for you and give you some feedback on whether you're in the right space.
Okay, let's take another question from online.
Okay, so this is from Matt Yarrington. Can we use this grant in conjunction with another Innovate UK open grant? So, for example, can we use this design grant for the human aspect of a product and then an open grant for further development of it?
I think that depends on how you structure the project. So you can't be doing the same thing with the two grants because there's a limitation on your contribution to the project. So if you win a 70% grant through this, you can't use other sources of public funding to make up your 30%. You can find other financial contributions, but you can't use public funding to make up your contribution. So you can't be doing the same thing with two grants from Innovate UK, but you could have two separate projects with distinct scope to each of those projects which are interrelated. So you could use some of the outputs from a successful design project to support an R&D project that you're doing with another grant, but there can't be any crossover in the activities. And also bear in mind you might not be successful in winning both grants. So if they're entirely tied together and you don't win a design grant, then you need to think about that.
So we'll go back to the room. So a question at the front here.
Hi, it's Miguel Vidal from Studio Architecture. Thank you so much for your presentation. I've got several questions. The first one is, can a company apply for several projects in the same round, let's say? And if we have a specific running project with specific clients and stakeholders, how sort of specific should we be in our application, and at which extent does the involvement of a higher education institution would give us like a plus in our application?
So the first question was around I forgot.
We can apply for several.
Yes, multiple applications. So I'm trying to remember the wording and the guidance. I can kind of preface all of this by saying if you have specific questions, happy to engage today. There's a general guidance for applicants document online, which gives you all sorts of information about eligibility for Innovate UK grants in general. There's a document around finances, which is really good for telling you which project costs are eligible. And the brief document for this competition will give you specific stuff. So do look there. And in answer to the question, I think that you can apply as a lead applicant on one project and be involved as a collaborator or a subcontractor on as many other projects as you like. If you're not leading an application, you can be a collaborator or subcontractor on as many as you like. But I think I'm right in saying you can only be the lead applicant on one application. It does say that in the brief document, so that's probably more accurate than I am. The second question was around I wasn't quite sure I followed it, being specific about a particular project structure.
Yeah, if in the application, if we've got a project, if we should name the sort of companies that we will be working with.
Absolutely, and you'll see later on this morning we'll talk through you'll get an idea of what the questions are on the application form. But yes, we're looking to see who's involved, what their expertise is, what their role will be within the project.
And thirdly, the involvement of higher.
Yes, you certainly can work with universities and academic institutions as subcontractors or collaborators. There's no advantage to doing so in terms of the score that you would receive. What we're really looking for on these projects is appropriate design expertise. Again, if you're a company that's not done this before, that doesn't have in-house design technology, design resource, don't just go to your mate's brother's uncle who has a web design company or the guys down the road because they're the first place that you found. Take some time, find the right people to help you, and we want to see that you're actually bringing in the right kind of expertise, whether that happens to come from a design consultancy, a sole trader, or a university, depends on your particular needs.
Okay, we have another question at the front. I mean, just to fill in a little gap on finding the right partner, that's something that KTN can help you with. So please talk to myself or Jake or Delina. As a network, our whole purpose is to put companies in touch with each other to build the right kind of collaborations. So it's very much about matching needs and capabilities. So if you have a particular need, we have a very good reach in terms of different sectors and industries to find the right kind of companies to be working with. Please, question down the front.
Oh, the mic's gone to the back. We'll come to you next.
Hi, I'm Stephen Hicks from Oxide. This would be our first application. Is there any way we can look for examples of successful applications in the past to help us guide through some of the questions?
Probably not for this specific competition, because actually this is the first time that we've run this competition through. I'm going to make another point here, actually, which is that some of you that might have been involved with applications last year, you'll be familiar with the application procedure we used then was PDF forms, and you downloaded a form, typed into it and re-uploaded it. The competition this time round is running on our new online system, which is a bit more streamlined, I'm happy to say, and a bit easier to use. So it's a not too scary online application form. Again, I think the KTN will be happy to give you guidance on an application form. I can't point you towards an example application for this particular competition. The questions that we're asking on the application form are slightly different to our regular R&D competitions, which is why they're not directly comparable.
Thank you very much, Ben. Andrew Cowan, Future Care UK. I've been through this process before in the first round where we got support. Is there the same arduous and costly process of administration and having third-party audit on the accounts as part of the submission?
You do need to have your accounts audited, and at the end of the process independent accountant's report on the project. It needs to be auditable because it's taxpayers' money, right? we
Okay,
have a
so
duty
one
of
should
care.
allocate funds to achieve that, and that's part of the accepted costs of the process.
So check any question around eligible costs. My advice to you is to look at the documentation online and check what's included within that.
The second question is the application form available on a Word document, which I've been asking for several times on these applications, because whilst you're trying to undertake work on an online basis, it's actually not helpful when you're working with lots of different collaborators. And I was wondering whether or not there's a simple Word document that includes all the bits and pieces that would be online within the application process. If not, it's a question of having to copy the damn thing.
To the best of my knowledge, that doesn't exist at the moment, and I'm sorry that you've had struggles with the online system. It is relatively new, as I say, we weren't using it last year, so I do know that internally there's an ongoing
conversation
business
on that
process
point.
improvement project, I think they call it, which is always looking at taking on board.
It's
that
just that I'm
feedback,
dyslexic, and it's much easier to work on offline than online. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Okay, can we take a few more questions from online contributors?
Okay, we've got a few here. First one, how long does an SME lead need to be trading for?
I don't believe there are any restrictions on that. Again, I'm probably not the expert, so it might be worth a quick email to our customer support to check. But my understanding is if you're registered, you can be effectively a new business applying in.
Okay. And there are a few examples of potential projects. So the first one is, would a purely digital product be that enabled people to manage their tasks and times be considered?
Yes. We're far more interested in the design process that you're going through and the value that you're looking to get from that, rather than the area or what your actual product might be. The process is really what's important for us.
Okay. We are a startup, so this is from Lab Play Studio. We are a startup design thinking and research agency. We are interested in applying for the grant. However, we can also provide design-based expertise to other applicants. So is this possible?
Yes. So you can, I think as I mentioned, you can be the lead applicant on one application, and you can also collaborate or subcontract on other projects.
Okay, that's good. I did see a few hands raised over here as well, so you get a microphone to the table here.
Yeah, and there's one at the front as well if we have time.
Farnaz Nikpur, Human Centre Design, University of Liverpool. I was just wondering, in terms of eligibility, would charities and certain, let's say, innovation hubs within NHS trusts be eligible to apply?
Yeah, so I think Joe might cover this in his presentation. Charities, generally speaking, aren't eligible to lead competitions, to lead projects, but it does depend a bit on how the particular organisation has been set up. So, for example, certain social enterprises, if you're a social enterprise that's been set up as a limited company or a CIC, a community interest company, in those cases you might be eligible to apply as a business to a lead. So if you have a specific case in mind, it perhaps is worth making contact with customer support and just checking whether you're eligible. As I say, it depends on your articles of association, really, whether you meet the criteria.
NHS trusts, how about that? I mean certain, for example, innovation centres within them which are functional.
I don't know is the simple answer to that. I would check with people who have more in-depth understanding than I do before I give you an answer.
Was the gentleman next to you?
Hi, I'm Marek Kultis from Science Practice. I can read that the projects must start by 1st of January 2019, but is that the earliest that they can start?
No, as I mentioned, I think it's hard to give an exact date for when your project can start, because once you've been awarded funding, say there's a bit of, we need to get a contract in place with you that needs to be signed off and so on. So if that process happens very quickly, the project potentially could start quite quickly. If there are any delays, it might be a bit later. So can't give you an exact date, but I would imagine that projects would start from around mid-November. I think you'd struggle to start sooner than that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's a question on the left.
Hello, I'm Chris McKeeman from Orange LV, an innovation company. We've recently established in the UK. We have headquarters in Seattle and different studios around Europe. How much of the work would need to be carried out in the UK?
That's a good question, and I think the line in the official documentation is that work needs to be carried out in the UK. Whether there's a percentage, I'm not sure. Again, might be if that is something that's important to you, that you would expect a certain amount to be carried out elsewhere, then it might be worth making contact and asking the question directly.
Thank you.
Okay. Question at the front table, Jane.
Hi. Do you know whether there will be any further rounds of this funding, or is that unknown in the current climate?
Very, very well said. Unknown in the current climate.
Okay, question back table, and then we'll move back to this one.
Hi, Victoria from Tenchi. Just a quick question about if we start a project in November or December. We had this in the previous round where everybody goes on holiday, so you lose out on a few weeks. And if we've only got the 3 months, is there a possibility for extension if we start and we have to run over that holiday period?
I think the straightforward answer is no. Now, there may be certain circumstances where an extension is offered, but I think work on the basis that the project needs to be finished and invoiced by the 31st of March. I think it's a bit of a kind of Cinderella's carriage situation. The money turns into a pumpkin after midnight on the 31st of March. So work to that assumption, I think.
Thank you. So question over here and then the lady behind you.
Just a very quick one. So just thinking about micro enterprises and very new businesses, does the audit requirement only apply to the project accounts, or would it apply to their entire accounting if, for example, they're not usually opting to audit?
Yes. Frankly, I'm not sure I'm the best qualified person to answer the question. Joe may have more information, but I think, again, if you get in touch with customer support, they can forward the query to finances and they'll be able to give you a much better answer than I could. So sorry about that.
Thank you.
Sally Brazier, Searstrail. Can you give us some examples from the first 2 rounds of the type of projects that were ones that you wanted to fund, and some examples, not literally, but generically, of things that really weren't the right sort of project?
Yes, I mean, where to start? So we funded a diverse range, and that was what we were looking for. That's fine. As I say, there were projects which were looking to interrogate a particular product or service idea and carry out user testing. There were others which had a much broader scope in terms of, we're perhaps a business that's done one thing, but we don't know where to go next, so we're going to conduct some broad research. It's hard to kind of pick particular examples. I think those that were most successful, as I alluded to earlier, were the ones that really took the opportunity to take a step back. And one of the bits of feedback that we got quite often from companies was how valuable it had been, particularly if they're a smaller organisation. And you know what it's like. Day to day, you're just trying to turn the wheel and make ends meet. And if you're doing that, there's a real conflict between having to do that and actually successful innovation, which we know involves actually taking a bit of time out sometimes to look at fundamentally what problem you're trying to solve and whether you're a good market fit. So feedback that we got was that companies had really appreciated the opportunity to actually have a bit of money that they could use to take the focus off the day-to-day and actually look at, okay, where are we going to go next? What are we going to be doing in 6 months' time, in a year's time, in 2 years' time? So those projects were very successful. Direct customer insight. There was one project which was looking at a solution for The market was offshore fishermen, and they had spent a lot of time literally hanging out in cafes with fishermen in little Cornish fishing villages, and it was a very difficult market to understand, and also a difficult market to convince that what you're doing is actually going to be of value to them. In some ways, they're quite old-fashioned. So that was really helpful. The projects that were out of scope tended to be the ones that had much more of a technical focus. Actually, they were just really looking to do some technical R&D, prove the technical feasibility of something, which, yes, it's important, but you can do that other ways, and this is really an opportunity to do something different. So not very specific, sorry, but...
One question to that, actually.
Hi, it's Ishan Jai from Caronware Collection. Do we fund the project and invoice Innovate UK, or does Innovate UK fund us and we start? How does it work? Because I think there was something similar.
Invoicing in arrears, so you need to pay the bills and then invoice us. One of the things that I'm actually looking into at the moment is generally in our competitions the projects are much longer and the invoicing is on a quarterly basis. I'm hoping that we can set it up on a monthly basis in this case, because obviously if it's a 3-month project and you're only invoicing once, then you've got to pay for the whole project and then invoice us, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So hopefully we can make that monthly.
Hi, I'm Jeremy from To the Power of Us. If the project, sorry, as an SME, you said it was 70% that you would fund. Mm-hmm. So does that mean if it's a £57,000 project, you would fund 70% of that, or is the total of the fund 40,000, and therefore it would be 28,000 that you would fund?
The latter. Okay. So the total project value cannot be more than £40,000, and the maximum grant that we will provide to anyone will be £28,000.
I'm just going to take one last question from the room and then I'll wrap up the session.
Hi there. Just on that last point made, VAT should be factored in, shouldn't it?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, we had a case. We worked with a client who hadn't factored that in, and it caused a problem. So, thought I'd bring that up.
Okay.
I'm going to bring the session to a close. If there are any particular questions specifically, do grab Ben at coffee time, because he will be here for the whole day. Thank you very much to our speakers this morning. That was really useful to go through the competition scope, and thanks to Ellie for providing further elucidation on the process. We've got a coffee break now, which is downstairs in the room where you registered. I would like people to come back for 11:40, and in fairness to the people who are listening online, if we could try and make a prompt start. Okay, thank you very much. Hope you found some refreshment there and some good conversations. Just waiting for people to find their seats. And Ash, how are we doing with the... Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for returning. We're now going to... We've looked at the competition and what it's about and had that sort of explained and illustrated. So hopefully that's whetted your appetite, provided you with some stimulation about what you could do in this space. So I'd now actually like to hand over to Joe, who will be taking you and walking you through the process of I'd like to apply, so what do I actually do in terms of putting that together? What are the criteria? What's the process of going through that and making a good application? So Joe, over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Lyford. I'm the portfolio manager from Innovate UK for this competition. So effectively, I'll be managing the competition from now up until the point that successful projects actually begin doing their work. So I'll be covering, as mentioned, the competition process elements for you today. And in terms of the structure, I'll touch on eligibility very briefly. I'll run you through the actual application process and how to submit an application to us. I'll talk about application finances and what you can include within your project costs. I will talk to you about how the assessment process works for this competition. project setup. So in other words, what will happen should you be successful in applying to this competition. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session for you to ask any questions you have regarding the competition process. So this first slide is just a reminder of the key eligibility criteria that we have in place for this competition. So as you can see, the lead organisation must be a UK registered business or an RTO. The work must be carried out within the UK, and you must intend to exploit the results in or from the UK as well. We expect project costs to range between £10,000 and £40,000. The duration of projects can be up to 30 months, and the research proportion of total project costs is capped at 50% for this competition. So these are the types of organisations that Innovate UK fund. So obviously, as you can see, we support a wide range of businesses from small, medium and large. We also fund many different types of research organisations, including universities and RTOs. We also support public sector organisations, and just a reminder that any organisations that apply for this competition must be based within the United Kingdom. The amount of funding that you can actually receive from us does depend on which of these categories that you fit into, but I'll touch on that later on in the presentation. So as you may be aware, for this competition, projects can be single applicant or collaborative. So you can work alone or in collaboration with other organisations. If you do decide to work collaboratively, there must be evidence of a genuine collaboration within your application that is compliant with the criteria that we've listed on the screen. So you will need to explain in your application how all parties within the consortium will contribute to the project and therefore benefit from the collaboration. It's also worth mentioning that we do have some rules with regards to making more than one application for this competition, as you can see on the screen. So any one business or RTO may lead on an application and partner in a further 2 applications. If a business or RTO is not leading an application, it can be a collaborator in any number of applications, and organisations other than businesses or RTOs cannot lead on an application, but again, they can collaborate on any number of applications. So that's something worth bearing in mind up front, because if you do not comply with these rules, then your projects will not be sent for assessment. And this slide is just a reminder of the key dates to bear in mind for this competition as well. So as you know, the competition opened yesterday. We have the briefing event today, and the main date to stress is the submission deadline, which is Wednesday the 19th of September. That is a noon deadline, so please do bear that in mind when working on your application. The Innovation Funding Service is actually running, it's the platform that runs this competition, literally shuts at midday on the deadline, so we do recommend that you leave plenty of time in which to submit your application to us. And finally, we expect to inform applicants of the results of their application by Friday, the 26th of October. Okay, so moving on to the application process that we have in place for this competition. So firstly, you can actually find this competition now published on our website. If you go under Funding Opportunities, you can click on the competition to see a tabbed view of the eligibility criteria, the scope, the key dates, and information on how to actually apply to us. And when you are happy to apply for the competition, you can simply click on Start New Application. To apply for a competition, the lead applicant will need to create an account within the Innovation Funding Service. Although if you have applied to us in a previous competition, then you can simply sign in and use your existing IFS account to submit to us for this competition. You have the functionality to use Companies House Lookup to search for your organisation from its registration number to save typing in manually the name and address, which therefore may lead to errors in your proposal. Although if you are not registered on Companies House, you do still have the option to override and manually enter any information. Once you've actually logged in, you will have a view similar to the one that you can see on the screen. And from here, you can set up your consortium and the team members that you wish to be included within the application. So team members are the other people from your organisation that will be working with you on the application. And then we have collaborators, which are actually the partner organisations who will also be working on the application with you if you do choose to submit a collaborative proposal for this competition. It's very easy to invite participants to join your application simply by entering their name and their email address, and IFS will send an email out to them with steps on how they can therefore go and join your consortium. It will send them an email to create an account and join the team. You will be able to invite these people to help you with your application by assigning questions to them for them to actually go in and support on your responses. Any collaborative partners will be responsible for entering their own project costs, so that is something for you to bear in mind if you are working collaboratively. And the application overview allows you to see the details such as the competition title, again, the application deadline that we have in place for the competition, the progress bar for your application, which will obviously give you an indication as to how much you have left to complete. And finally, the terms and conditions that we have in place for this competition. So as I mentioned, if your application is to be collaborative in this competition, you can invite partners within the application team section where you will simply need a name and email address to add them to the team. In terms of actually answering questions within the Innovation Funding Service, when completing your application, you can assign questions to other people in your organisation, or if you are working collaboratively, to partner organisations for them to actually complete or edit or make changes to the responses that you provided to the questions. They then have the option to assign the question to someone else, perhaps for them to have some input into the question, or they can simply mark the question as complete. If they do mark it as complete, you do still, however, have the option to go in and make changes up until the point that you actually submit your application to us. IFS also allows you to spell check and format your responses to the questions. You're able to view the word count limit as you actually go through responding to the question, which gives you an indication as to how much room you have left. And importantly, you're able to see online guidance when answering each individual question. So it's all built in to the system, so it's a much more integrated system than what we have used previously. We do ask, however, that you please avoid including any hyperlinks within the responses to questions, as the assessors will not have the functionality to follow these when they actually come to assess your application. So here you can see the application form layout that we have for this competition, and the form has 3 sections that you need to complete before you can submit an application to us. Firstly, we have the project details section, which they're not marked by assessors, but they are key to setting the scene, and the assessors still have visibility of them, so it's still worth spending some time on them to make sure they are absolutely fine. We have the application questions themselves, so these are the 6 questions that are actually scored for this competition. And the third section is your finances, which is all to do with your project costs and the amount of grant that you're eligible to receive from us. So the first section, as I say, is project details, so it's things such as the title of your proposal, the timescales, and the innovation area concerned. We ask you to provide a project summary, which is a short summary of your project and what is actually innovative about it. Likewise, we similarly ask you to provide a public description, which is another description of your project, which would be published should you be successful in applying for the competition. So it's worth making sure you don't include perhaps any commercially sensitive information within that section. And then the final area of the first section is scope. So you're asked how your project actually aligns with the scope of the competition. And obviously this is a very important first element to your proposal, as if your application is not deemed to fit within the scope of the competition, then it will be classed as ineligible and it will not be sent out for assessment. So if you have any slight doubts or questions as to whether you are in scope or not, it's worth clarifying them with us up front to avoid spending time on an application which ultimately doesn't get assessed. So section 2 includes the 6 questions that will be assessed, and these can actually be found under the How to Apply tab of the competition webpage. So you don't actually have to go and start an application to see the questions that you will need to answer. You can simply go to our website and they will have them there. Very detailed guidance is actually provided within each of these questions within IFS. So I'm not going to repeat the content today and go into lots of guidance that you can simply see online. But as you can see, there are 6 questions for this competition for you to answer. And please note that questions 2 and 3 allow for an appendix that you can upload to supplement your responses to those questions. And these are limited to 1 megabyte in size. And the third section covers the finances, as I mentioned earlier. So the finance section, firstly for industry partners within IFS, is split into 3 areas, as you can see. And each organisation must complete each of these areas individually before an application can be submitted to us. The 3 areas are your project costs, your organisation, and your funding. And I'll take you through each of these now. So the first area is your project costs. And for those of you who have applied to us previously, you may recognise the eligible cost categories on the screen. So you will need to enter the detail within any required categories for your project, and the service will calculate the values for you. I will touch on what is and what isn't eligible across these cost categories as we go through, but just to reiterate again, there is plenty of guidance on this on our website, so the guidance that I give today won't be completely exhaustive. So firstly, for labour costs, you can enter the details for anyone who is to work directly on your project. The service allows you to enter their project role, their gross annual salary, and the number of days that they're actually going to spend working directly on the project. And it will then calculate a daily rate and subsequent total cost for you. Just to point out here, importantly, all staff must be paid by PAYE, and you should include non-discretionary items only. Discretionary items, however, such as dividends or any kind of performance-related pay, for example, are not eligible and should not be included within your application. For overhead costs, you have 3 options available to you. If you do not wish to include any overhead costs at all, then you can simply select that option and it will just produce a naught value for you. Secondly, you have the option to select the 20% of labour costs option, which obviously automatically calculates a value based on your labour costs. Or the third option is that you can actually choose to calculate your own overhead costs yourself based on organisational information that you have. The calculate overhead option is split into 2 different areas of indirect and direct overhead costs. So we at Innovate UK class indirect or administration overheads as those costs associated with back office functions such as HR or finance, for example, who will not be working directly on the project, but they will still be playing some kind of supporting role during the project. These costs must be both additional and directly attributable to your project. And secondly, we have direct overhead costs, and these are the costs associated with staff working directly on the project, so those that you've included within your labour costs. And are items such as laptops or utilities, for example, which again must be directly attributable to the project. So IFS allows you to download and upload the calculation spreadsheet if you do choose to pursue this option when calculating your overhead costs. For material costs, you can simply enter the items, volumes, and the unit costs for materials that are to be used solely on the project itself, and the subsequent totals will be calculated for you. Just a point here that we would expect any residual values of any materials to be removed when you enter the cost per item, so that all costs you include for your project are entirely project specific. For capital usage, you can include a description of any assets that you require to deliver your project. You can state whether they are new or existing. You can state the depreciation period to be used, which should be in line with your organisation's depreciation policy. You can state the value of the asset at the start of the project, the residual value at the end, and then finally the degree of utilisation required of that asset to actually deliver your project. IFS will then calculate automatically the usage cost based on the details that you've included, such as in the example that you can see on the screen. For subcontract costs, you can include the cost of work which cannot reasonably be carried out in-house already. Just to note here that if the work is to be carried out abroad, then please do include an explanation as to why a UK alternative has not been selected for that work. And likewise, if the work is to be carried out by a linked entity, such as a parent or sister company, for example, then please state that it will be carried out entirely at cost with no profit element incorporated within the figure that you state. For travel and subsistence, you can include the costs of journeys which, again, are really necessary to deliver your project to us. Do make sure that the purpose is explained, and note that any sales or marketing or any kind of exploitation activity is not eligible, so please don't include any items relating to those. And the very last cost category is other costs, which is simply to be used for items that don't reasonably fit into the previous categories that we've gone through, such as, for example, training costs or patent filing costs, for example. Please ensure there's no double counting, obviously, across any of your cost categories, and you can simply describe and justify any such items within the text box provided in the system. Once you're happy that all of your project costs that you provided have been added to the system, you will be given a final opportunity to review them before you submit. And you also need to confirm to us that the costs you have included within your application are eligible as per the project cost guidance that you can find online. And then when you're happy, you can simply mark the section as complete, and that will increase your progress bar as you go through your application. The next area of the finance section is your organisation. And within this section, you need to enter details specifically relating to your organisation, such as its size, for example, which will then determine the level of grant that you're eligible to receive from us. And if you are a newly incorporated organisation and you don't have any financial account history, for example, then the service does still allow you to enter zero values, like you can see in the example on the screen. And the final area of the finance section for industry partners is your funding. So the level of grant that you can receive depends on two things, really. It depends, firstly, on the type of organisation that you are, as we saw earlier on in the presentation. And secondly, it depends on the type of research that you are carrying out in your project. And IFS will calculate your grant based on these two criteria. So this table explains the funding rules that we have in place for this competition. So businesses are quite clearly outlined on the slide. If you are a micro or small, you can receive a 70% grant intervention rate against your total eligible costs. For medium, it's 60%, and for large, it is 50%. Then for research organisations, universities can claim 100% funding, which is obviously 80% of the full economic cost. And then for other research organisations, they can also claim 100% grant funding, but they must be non-profit distributing, and they must clearly disseminate their project results. And finally, public sector organisations or charities are also eligible to receive 100% grant funding, but again, they must be performing research, and again, they must clearly disseminate their project results. So the example that we provided on the screen shows that the maximum level of grant entitled to an applicant is 70% based on the details that they have provided within the service. You also need to state whether you have any other public funding in place for your project, as this will obviously reduce the grant rate that you're eligible to receive from us. And you must also state that you agreed to the terms and conditions of the award. Some of you may know that these were previously outlined in something called a conditional offer letter, which we no longer use for competitions that run through IFS. So do tell us if you have received any other public sector funding related to the project that you're looking to carry out. You will need to declare this to us, but only for this project, so don't worry if you've carried out previous projects funded publicly in the past, or if you've got any ongoing projects of that nature. If you receive funding for previous work, it doesn't need to be listed, but any funding that you've received publicly for this project will need to be taken off your grant funding allowance, and you do actually have the functionality within IFS to manually amend the grant intervention rate if that does apply to you. So before submitting your application, you are able to view the financial overview. This page states the funding rules for the competition, so you can remind yourself of those, including eligible total project costs and the project duration parameters as well. So please do check that your figures are in line with the funding rules, and your total project costs must fall within the published eligible cost parameters rather than the grant that you're looking to receive from us. So please don't confuse the difference between project cost parameters and therefore the subsequent grant that you can receive from us. So there is a difference between project costs and project grant, so please don't confuse the two. And if any organisation wishes to participate in a project, but for whatever reason they do not wish to claim any grant from us, they will need to select the not requesting funding option within IFS, but still complete the project cost section, as this will contribute towards the total and impact on the level of research proportion that you're allowed for your project. They won't be named in the grant offer letter should you be successful in applying to this competition, but they will still need to be named in your collaboration agreement, because although there won't be any legal relationship between themselves and Innovate UK, there will obviously be some kind of legal relationship between them and the other partners within the consortium if you choose to submit a collaborative bid. So briefly then, the finances for academic partners are handled differently and are processed through the GES system. So this system is already very familiar with academics and universities. It's actually owned by the research councils rather than Innovate UK, and it validates costs for us to produce the 80% FEC figure, which is then used going forward with your application. So academic partners will only need to complete the Your Project Cost section within IFS, but this must be completed for them to be included as a collaborator on your project, should you wish to include an academic partner in your application. This next slide just shows you which fields will need to be completed for academic partners within IFS, which must be identical to the with council status PDF document, which you will need to upload as an appendix as well. And as I mentioned, given that the GES system is not actually owned by us, any queries relating to academic project costs are best directed to the GES help desk, whose contact details are provided on the screen. Okay, in terms of actually submitting your application to us, the next slide shows the project cost summary for a project with all of the participants included, so all of the consortium members are there. This is actually the level of details that assessors can see of your application when they come to actually scoring them. And it's also the level of detail that other members of the consortium can see. So the detail behind each of these cost categories can only be seen by individual organisations, because obviously it may contain some sensitive information. So essentially you are only able to see your own. In terms of validating project costs, IFS will check that all partners have actually marked their finances as complete and that the research proportion of total project costs is no greater than 50%. So it will then flag to you if there are any issues with these areas that you need to address before you can submit. You will then have the option to review any aspect of your application before you submit it to us, and you can go in and make changes if you need to. And we do recommend that you leave plenty of time, as I mentioned, to actually finalise your application before you submit it to us, because deadlines are completely absolute and we don't allow any exceptions. So when you are actually ready to submit your application to us, you can simply click on the confirmation green icon, and you'll be taken to this confirmation page, which also outlines the next steps in the process. So when you receive a view that looks like this, you can be confident that your application has been successfully submitted to us for us to review. So this table, I appreciate you might not be able to see it too well, but this table essentially shows the number of applicants for a previous competition submitting their proposals each hour leading up to the noon deadline that we had in place for that competition. So as you can see, quite overwhelmingly, the majority of applicants do leave it until the final hours to submit their application to us, even though at every single one of these briefing events we always tell them it's probably best not to do that. So again, we do strongly recommend submitting your application perhaps a little bit earlier than that to avoid any last-minute technical issues, because if it gets to 5 minutes before the deadline and you're having an issue with submitting your application and you try to contact us to get help with that, it's very unlikely that we are going to be able to help you in that short space of time. So yeah, one final time, please do submit your application to us in plenty of time. You then have the option within IFS to return to your dashboard page at any point. And this simply shows you the status of any applications that you have started or indeed submitted to us. Okay, moving on to the assessment process. So all applications submitted to us that are deemed to be eligible and in scope will be assessed by 5 independent assessors from both industrial and academic backgrounds, which we will then collate to produce a total average score per proposal. A couple of key things that assessors want from applications include clarity with the appropriate amount of information and detail. So they don't want to be completely overloaded and bombarded with detail, but at the same time, they don't want to have to make guesses and assumptions as to what you're trying to say or what you're trying to actually achieve within your project. So it's about finding the balance between those two. Do make sure that your responses are always fully justified and quantified where necessary. And finally, a viable opportunity for growth must be clearly presented throughout your application, which therefore necessitates an injection of public funding. Once applications have actually been assessed and scored, there will be feedback made available to you within your IFS dashboard, which will obviously explain why you have been either successful or unsuccessful. So even if you are unsuccessful in applying to this competition, you will still receive some feedback on your application, which hopefully will then help you to perhaps develop your idea in the future. And the project lead will be notified when this is available for you to view. Successful applicants will then go through to the project setup process within IFS. And that looks a little something like this, with all of the required project setup milestones listed as headings. So you as applicants therefore have good visibility of what you need to complete and also what we need to complete internally in order for your project to get up and running, which should hopefully speed up the process of getting projects off the ground. Each of these headings must show as complete before we can then issue you with a grant offer letter, which is then when you can actually go and begin working on your project. So I've just flagged the collaboration agreement as one very important milestone as part of the project setup process. So the return of the signed collaboration agreement, which we require for all collaborative projects, obviously. So this actually stipulates the relationship within the consortium. And from my experience of working at Innovate UK, it's probably the most common cause for delay in projects actually starting due to complex issues such as IP agreements, for example. So we do recommend that you begin working on these as early as possible if you do choose to submit a collaborative application to us for this competition. Okay, thank you for listening to me today, and I'll now happily take any questions that you have on the competition process, and I think Ben is happy to take any further questions you have on competition scope.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Jay. So we'll take questions. We'll invite questions from our online contributions as well. Just in terms of that whole process, KTN can help you in terms of putting that application together. So we can't write it for you because that would be wholly inappropriate, but we can help you with the exam questions, and Joe outlined the 6 questions that you need to put together in terms of making a good application. Now those 6, we can really help you with that exam technique because we see lots of applications to lots of competitions. We know what makes for a clearer exposition of your idea and what makes for a poorer one. So please do use us. We're a free resource to be able to go through that, and we can give you some useful feedback ahead of making that submission. That does sort of necessitate a certain degree of preparedness. So I was quite interested in your slide, Joe, about when people were actually putting the submit button onto that application, and it's literally on the morning that the deadline is. So that allows very little time for us to actually give you any useful feedback ahead of that. So please do talk to us early rather than later, and the earlier the better. So in terms of questions on that process, I'm sure that's generated some sort of reflections and questions from the room. Can I just have a first show of hands on questions? So question at the front, please, and then towards the side.
Hi, I had a couple of questions just on the finances mainly. What do we do about VAT? And if we have a subcontractor, their VAT in terms of the costs? Do you know if we have to use an accountant to give you back an audited profile, are the accountant's fees eligible in the project costs? And lastly, the quarterly drawdown, if it's a quarterly payment and it's a quarter after the project, that means that the applicant has to fund it completely and then be repaid. Is that correct?
So firstly on that, I think in terms of the payment of grant, typically for our competitions it is quarterly in arrears. I think given the length of project for this competition, I think we are looking to... Yeah. So we have done that before. So monthly grant payments, so obviously you only have to incur project costs up to the first month before you get grant back in arrears. In terms of your other questions on the VAT for subcontract costs, so the subcontract cost is it would include VAT. It would just be the standard amount that you'd pay for a piece of work, so to speak. And in terms of VAT for partners, I don't want to give you an incorrect answer. I think it is dependent on whether you are VAT registered or not. We might have to take that one after today. We can get you a response. If I speak to our project finance team, they will be able to give you a response on that, because I think it's not a clear yes or no, to my knowledge anyway. And sorry, was there another question that you had?
Yes, I had was if we have to give you an audited paperwork, is the cost of getting that audit done eligible in the sort of the other section of project costs?
I don't believe it is. I don't think it is, unfortunately.
And I had one last question, which is about the collaborative nature of it. You talk about collaborative projects. If a small company can subcontract up to 70%, it's possible for them to subcontract this work to the other party rather than actually have a collaboration agreement. Is that correct?
So you can use a subcontractor. So you can be a single applicant business, for example, and subcontract costs out. That wouldn't be seen as a collaborative project for us, but it would still be eligible. I don't think we have... Do we have a limit in place, Ben, for subcontract costs? 70%, okay.
So Ben, can you use a mic if there's one available? Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. You can structure your project however you prefer. So if you wish to use a subcontractor rather than having multiple collaborators on a project, that's fine. You don't really need to simplify the application.
Yeah, something we've seen quite a few times in previous competitions where you get sort of smaller companies that can't do everything themselves. So that arrangement is fine.
Had another question at the table at the front, to my right.
Is there a standard collaborative agreement?
They aren't standard as such, but there is an example collaboration agreement that we can make available. I'm not sure if it exists on our website, but it does definitely exist. So we have example ones, but obviously they tend to vary in nature. So there's not an expectation of there being the same format every single time, but there is an example one that we can make available to you if you'd like to have visibility of it.
Okay, another question at the front, and then there's a couple of questions online.
Hi. We've seen very, very appealing presentations earlier. Does this application process involve any sort of extra additional document apart from this sort of web form that we can submit?
No, so the objective of IFS is to be a fully integrated system. So we do say that all of the information that you need to submit an application will be available online. We're trying to do away with downloads, PDFs, that kind of thing. So all of the information is online. So all of the guidance that you need to complete your application will be built in.
So we can't submit our own sort of presentation documents apart from filling in those forms.
No, so the responses to the questions, obviously, it's just built in, so it's just in a Word box for you to type in. But you do, as I say, have the option to upload a couple of appendices to supplement responses to a couple of the questions. So that can be sort of non-text information and diagrams and that kind of thing.
Okay, so there's a question on the table. But before we get there, I'm going to go to Delina for a couple of questions from online.
This is from Ash. Can we include the cost of hiring engineers and software developers as part of the project cost?
So we do say that all costs that you include have to be incurred and defrayed within the project period itself. So any costs before actually starting your project can't actually be included.
And then the next question might be for Ben, actually. Can design companies apply to investigate internally generated projects?
Yes, if there's is the mic working? Yeah, if there's a commercial angle to the project and they're looking to explore an innovation opportunity to commercialise themselves, absolutely there's no reason why, just because you're a design business, you can't be the lead applicant. And just with reference to the previous question about employing people, as has been mentioned, costs outside of the project period can't be included, but obviously the labour costs associated within the project would be eligible. The fact that it's a new employee doesn't change the labour cost.
Okay, thank you. So back to a question at the front on my left.
Thanks. I mean, it relates to the question the gentleman raised this morning about having some kind of draft form with guidance that you could work on before actually starting to input online. Because it seems to me that I can see myself having to go in, download every question, download every guidance, park it somewhere else, talk to collaborators, work up a draft and then submit it. Possibly work up a draft collaboratively using Google Docs or whatever. So I think in terms of your sort of facilitation of this process, having something like a draft form that you could download that contained all the information that you could then use in your own way and then inform your input would be really useful.
Okay. There are...
That's a request.
So as I mentioned, all of the guidance is online before having to go in and actually work on an application. So that's one thing I will say. So I think the main competition page has many different tabs. The how to apply tab for this competition pretty much has everything you need. So although it's not something that you can download and have it in document format, unfortunately, it does still exist all in one place as long as you've got internet connection.
The microphone has been put in my hand, so I think someone's expecting me to say something in response to that. I mean, I think the way that we're going is to try and streamline it as much as possible, and we know from the past, the more documents and downloads you make available online, the more confusing it is for people that have not been through that process before. So I think we take on board, obviously, you might want to work offline in a draft. Fortunately, in this case, we only have 6 questions on the application form, so if you are going to paste them into your own Word document, it's not too onerous. But yeah, as has been mentioned, you are able to edit and work on that online application as a live process. It's only when you finally submit it that it's fixed.
Okay, great. We've now got a couple more questions online, so back to Lena, please.
Yeah, we've got 2 questions here. Are international students eligible for this fund?
I guess it would depend on where they're sitting. If they are working for an organisation that is within the UK and working on the project and they can appear on their payroll, then yes, I would say that's okay. It might be worth getting a bit more detail on that one perhaps, so we can make a bit more of a judgment call on it.
Okay. And the second one is, can legal fees and accountancy fees be included, and under which section?
I'd have to refer to the online guidance that you can also have a look at. I think there are some legal fees that we can include within the project costs, but if you go to the online project cost guidance, there is a full list of costs which aren't included, and I think legal fees would be something within the other cost section. So if you go onto there online, you'll be able to see the sort of things we expect. And one thing we'll say is that on this next slide here, we do have contact details. So if you do have any follow-up questions, sometimes it's easier just to get in contact with our support team. In this case, they would be able to pass the question on to the project finance team, who are the real experts in terms of project costs and eligibility. So often we have to have a bit of a think and a bit of a look into questions to make a call on them. So don't hesitate to get in contact with them.
Any other questions? Further one at the front.
Just to extend what's just been asked on audit, the requirement to audit formally through an external or using an external accountant, is that a necessity? Because it wasn't referred to specifically in your presentation.
Yeah, so to my knowledge, it is an independent accountant's report that will be required at the end of the project, and there are certain criteria as to the type of firm that you can use, and we do have that, so we can make that available to you if that's something you need to have visibility of.
We see type of firm in terms of their certification?
Yes.
Or accreditation?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm making the assumption that's just fairly across the board in chartered, certified accountancy.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm not too involved with the actual claiming process of the grant. But if you do have questions on, grant claiming and independent accountants reports, we do have some guidance that we can share with you
through customer services.
Yes.
Actually, there was an aspect to the auditing process this morning. One of the questions was, at the end of the project, is it the project that gets audited, or is it the company that gets audited?
The project, as far as I'm aware, because they'd be looking to for confirmation of the project costs, rather than for anything else irrelevant to the project to do with the organisation itself.
Okay. Another question at the front?
Hi, question about subcontracting costs. Yep. Within subcontractor costs, we're looking to be one. We help with user engagement, which means we go out and talk to individuals in workshops and we talk to local organisations. Can we claim within subcontractor costs for payments to individuals, so vouchers to thank them for their time and input, and donations to the local groups who facilitate us to reach those those individuals? So we might go to Age UK. Our normal process would be to give people a voucher to say thank you, and also to make a donation to the local branch of Age UK. Is that eligible under subcontract costs?
So if you were to come in as a subcontractor, so if that's something that you would do as standard practice as a subcontractor, then within reason you would be able to do that. Subcontract costs would tend to be queried if they were particularly high. So they might ask you for, they would ask the actual organisation in which you sit for explanation as to what you're actually doing. But if that's something that you would do as per standard, then I think that would be fine, because they're simply paying you for a piece of work that you would do normally anyway. And obviously, because you're not actually seen as a grant claiming partner of the consortium, there's a bit more flexibility for you. You don't have the same restrictions as such.
Thank you.
Any other questions? There's one at the back. Where's the nearest mic?
I'm keen to understand the relationship between yourself as the kind of project lead, if that's the right terminology to use, and the assessors. And do you set a kind of guidance as to what you guys are keen on seeing, or as being the ones that would kind of get to the 80% percentile or whatever it may be to achieve funding?
Yes, obviously they are independent from us, so they don't work for Innovate UK. We do have a separate briefing for the assessors. So when it comes to actually applications, when it comes to the deadline, an application has been submitted, myself and Ben will actually brief the assessors as to what we're looking for. A lot of the content, to be honest, is very similar to what we actually give to the applicants. So we give them, the same information we give you. And we have guidance matrices for the assessors to use for each of the questions that are scores that you respond to.
So obviously they're independent too.
Yeah.
And you set a time to do those. So how do they decide what? Because it's quite subjective. Because you guys need to think one thing, they need to think another.
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
So a lot of the assessors are quite experienced, so that they understand what we're looking for. One thing I will say is when we get the scores back from all of the assessors, we do quite an in-depth review into the scores they provided and also the commentary they provided in your feedback as well. And what we would do is, if we were to come across an assessor who we think out of the 5 that's marked your application is completely out of line, they might have marked it down and without justified reason for doing so, that we may actually remove their score to only have an average. It's actually representative across the rest of the assessors. So we do quite a bit of analysis to ensure that our assessors are essentially doing their job properly.
Yeah, and just to confirm what Joe's saying there are quite a lot of checks and balances in place. So firstly, the assessors that we use for this competition have been selected because they have an understanding of what early stage design process looks like and understand what we're looking for. We brief them thoroughly. So as Joe said, similar kind of information that you've seen today, we talk through exactly what we're looking to fund. And to support them with that, we actually give them a detailed scoring matrix as well, which says, if you should be scoring 9 or 10 if the answer looks like this, you should be scoring 7 or 8 if it looks like this, and so on. So it's really quite detailed. Obviously, the reason that every application gets seen by 5 assessors is to try and kind of balance out any subjectivity between them. And finally, as Joe says, we look in quite a lot of detail once the scoring comes in. And if there's someone who's consistently giving much higher scores than everyone else, then we choose to either discount that assessor, give the applications to someone else, etc. The things we can do to manage that process. So it's a risk that we understand, and it's one that we take a lot of measures to rectify.
Okay. Any last questions for Joe? Any more online? No, we're good. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you.
So it's always a hard set of questions on the very specifics of the criteria. So obviously we've been recording this, so in terms of going through that process again, if things were become clouded over a number of days and weeks since, when you actually need to put that application together, do revisit the recording and just refresh yourselves of that guidance and that information and insight. I'd like to just hand over to Jake now to sort of move us from the morning session and to tee up the afternoon, and also just to outline and clarify how KTN can help you in this process. So, Jake, thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Joe. As Ed says, everything is being recorded here today, so you may catch up on any information that you may have missed. But we also have some other events going on. So there's a briefing and networking event in Manchester in 2 days' time. We also have some webinars as well that you may tune into, and they will be targeted for first-time applicants on the afternoon of Tuesday the 21st. And if you have applied for other Innovate UK funding but may have been rejected because maybe your market need wasn't spot on, then this is a great opportunity to then boost your application next time round. So we have a webinar that's targeted for re-applicants of previous Innovate UK funding competitions. That's on the morning of Tuesday the 21st. So I'll just give you a brief outline of who we are, who KTN is, because as Ed has mentioned a couple of times, we can help you with the application process, and we can help you find the necessary partners or expertise if you need them on your projects. So who is Innovate UK? We find expertise, we find markets, and we find finance for those that need them. Who are those? Those may be businesses, they may be entrepreneurs, they may be academics, and they may be funders as well. So what we do, KTN, a not-for-profit organisation, we help grow the economy and improve people's lives by capturing maximum value from innovative ideas, scientific research and creativity. And we bring together these businesses, entrepreneurs, academics and funders to speed up in innovation and develop new products and services for that greater economic growth or brand new innovations. So we do a number of things. We have a whole wealth of information and news that you can keep up to date with, either online or one-to-one with our knowledge transfer managers, of which there are around about 180 of us now, in 16 core industry sectors, from agri-food to chemistry to manufacturing, materials or transport, design being one of them. We also do partnering, so we have 60,000 active members across our network that we can introduce you to across those 16 core sectors that I mentioned. And we help with funding, so today being one of them as well, we can help you get in connection with funding opportunities through events such as these. So us in the design team, we're very appreciative of opportunities like this to raise the profile of design and its impact upon the economy. So yes, if you need any design expertise, please do speak to us or do speak to other people in the room with the pink name badges on, as well as the networking wall that Delina has already gone down to man. That will be live after this event as well, so if you didn't manage to speak to who you need to today, you can look at that networking platform and try and find the right partners. Alternatively, speak to us directly and we're more than happy to help out.
You've seen all this before, but I've seen a couple of you take a photo of it. I would encourage you to take a photo again of it now. This is where you can get the necessary information. So about the application eligibility and scope, please do talk to Innovate UK. We are separate to Innovate UK. KTN is separate, so we are allowed to give you advice and feedback on your applications. And as Ed said, let's do that sooner rather than later. So, okay, the most important thing is lunch will be ready downstairs now. We're going to return back at 2 for some networking, some planned networking, and we've got 15 or so companies that will be pitching their prospective applications, pitching them so that people can then talk to them afterwards on these tables and add their input where it is needed. So yeah, back here at 2. Thank you very much.